The day was bright and clear, the kind of morning that made the world feel calm, yet filled with quiet anticipation. The community hall, where the piano auditions were being held, was already buzzing with activity. People of all ages, some carrying large music folders, others with worn-out sheet music in their hands, were sitting on the long rows of chairs or pacing nervously near the back of the room. The polished wooden floor reflected the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and the walls were lined with framed pictures of past winners and famous musicians, their eyes seeming to watch every newcomer carefully. Among the crowd, a woman walked slowly, clutching her old leather music folder tightly. Her clothes were simple, plain, and not the kind that drew attention, and her shoes had clearly seen better days. She was not young, but not old either, just somewhere in the middle, carrying the quiet look of someone who had lived through many ordinary days without needing applause. She moved carefully, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and found an empty chair near the corner of the hall. Sitting down, she opened her folder and carefully rearranged the sheets inside, as though they were treasures she had guarded for years. Around her, other contestants were whispering and laughing softly. A few were pointing subtly in her direction, some even nudging each other and smirking. They thought she looked out of place, and they did not hide their judgment. Their eyes followed her every move, their faces filled with amusement and a hint of mockery. It was clear they had already made up their minds about her before she had played a single note. She seemed to sense their glances, but she did not respond or even flinch. Her hands rested lightly on the folder, and her expression remained calm, almost serene, as if she were in her own world. The woman glanced briefly at the grand piano set in the center of the stage. Its black surface gleamed under the soft lights, the keys perfectly arranged, waiting to be played. The other contestants were already rehearsing their opening notes in their heads, their fingers twitching in anticipation. Some tapped lightly on invisible keys, and others whispered scales under their breath. The room was filled with a mix of nervous energy and quiet excitement, and she simply sat there, letting the sounds and the movements around her wash over her without participating. A young man sitting a few rows away leaned over to his friend and whispered, loud enough for the woman to hear, "Do you see her? I mean, who even dresses like that for an audition? She looks like she walked out of some old movie." His friend chuckled, glancing toward her, and shook his head. They whispered more, speculating about her abilities, assuming that someone who looked so plain and ordinary could not possibly be talented. The woman heard them, but did not react. Instead, she took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and seemed to let go of all the noise around her. The judges, seated at a long table at the front of the hall, were reviewing the score sheets quietly, occasionally glancing up at the contestants as they prepared. They were experienced musicians and had seen all kinds of participants, from young prodigies with sparkling eyes to older performers who had spent a lifetime honing their craft. Today, their expressions remained neutral, their faces giving away nothing about what they were thinking. The woman in the corner, with her simple dress and calm demeanor, drew no particular attention from them yet, but there was something about her posture, the way she held herself with quiet dignity, that suggested she belonged to a different story than the one the others imagined not. As the first few contestants were called to the stage, the whispers in the audience grew louder. Each time someone walked up and played, the murmurs and comments would ripple through the room. Some were skilled and confident, while others stumbled slightly, but the atmosphere remained tense and full of expectation. Everyone seemed eager to see who would stand out, and everyone had already decided who probably would not. The woman continued to sit, going over her sheet music again and again, her eyes scanning the notes carefully, her fingers occasionally tapping the folder as if rehearsing the movements. She did not look at the other contestants. She did not respond to the whispers, and she certainly did not attempt to defend herself against their judgment. Her focus was entirely on the music, on the pieces she had prepared, and on the journey she had taken to get to this moment. It was clear she was not here for attention or praise. She was here because she had a story, a past filled with music that no one else had seen, and a determination that could not be measured by appearances. The tension in the room built gradually. Contestants came and went. Applause followed some performances. Polite claps acknowledged others, and a few moments of awkward silence marked the ones that faltered. With each passing performance, the young men and women who had mocked the plain-looking woman grew more confident in their assumptions. They whispered to each other about how easy it would be to beat her, how she would never measure up to the polished, practiced performers around her. Their voices carried a light, teasing tone, full of self-assurance and a sense of superiority. But in the quiet corner, the woman did not let any of it reach her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of other performances fade, and imagined herself at the piano. She thought about the many hours she had spent alone with her music, the countless nights she had practiced while the world slept, the sacrifices she had made to put her family first, and the dreams she had quietly tucked away. This audition was more than a test. It was a chance to reclaim a part of herself she had almost forgotten, a chance to show, even if only to herself, that her music still had a voice. A few other contestants noticed her silence and calm demeanor. They exchanged puzzled glances, wondering why she was not nervous, why she was not fidgeting or complaining. Some thought it was odd. Others thought it was a sign of weakness, not realizing that strength often appears quietly, without fanfare. The woman's presence in the corner of the hall, unnoticed by the judges and underestimated by her peers, carried a subtle weight that only time and experience could give. Time passed, and finally, the moment came for her to be called. The stage manager, a cheerful older man with a clipboard, announced her name. The whispers around the room grew louder, some with laughter, some with disbelief. The young men who had mocked her nudged each other and exchanged smirks, certain that the next few minutes would be entertaining for the audience at her expense. She stood slowly, adjusting her folder, and walked toward the stage with a quiet confidence that seemed to surprise everyone. Her steps were measured, deliberate, and unhurried, as though she were walking into a familiar room rather than an intimidating audition hall. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, looking at the keys, feeling the smooth black and white surfaces beneath her fingertips. The audience could sense a change, though they did not yet understand it. Her posture was straight, her hands relaxed, and her expression calm but focused. She did not look around, did not acknowledge the whispers, did not respond to the smirks. She simply let the music begin in her mind, letting it flow through her before touching a single key. It was as if she and the piano were old friends, ready to speak to each other after years of waiting. The woman lifted her hands, placing them gently on the keys, and took a slow, deep breath. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. The first note, soft and deliberate, filled the hall. It was not loud or showy, but it carried a clarity and precision that immediately drew attention. The audience quieted, the whispers stopped, and even the judges leaned forward slightly, curious to see what would unfold. The mocking contestants stared, their confident expressions faltering as they realized that what they had assumed about her might be wrong. For the woman, the music was not just sound. It was memory, emotion, and expression all in one. Each note she played told a story of years spent in quiet dedication, of love for the art that had been her companion through loneliness and sacrifice. The soft, steady rhythm of her fingers on the keys created a gentle wave that washed over the audience, pulling them into her world. The polished floorboards reflected her movements, the sunlight catching her hair in subtle highlights, and the simplicity of her appearance faded against the richness of the music she produced. By the time she finished the first few measures, The room was no longer filled with judgment or mockery. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was happening, something that could not be measured by appearances or assumptions. People leaned forward in their seats, their faces showing surprise, curiosity, and a growing sense of admiration. Even the contestants who had mocked her earlier felt a pang of doubt, a realization that they had underestimated her, that they had been cruel without cause. And still, she played on, unaware of the effect she was having. She did not seek applause, did not seek recognition. She was lost in the music, in the connection between her hands, her heart, and the piano. The hall, once filled with whispers and judgments, had become a place of pure listening, a space where her talent spoke louder than any opinion, louder than any appearance. As the final notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, the woman sat back slightly, her eyes still closed for a brief moment. She had poured herself into the performance, and the silence that followed was heavy with respect. After the woman returned to her seat, the hall seemed different. The whispers had quieted, but the tension lingered. Contestants who had mocked her moments before were now looking at her with a mixture of surprise and unease. They were used to judging people by appearance, by confidence, by the shine of a performance, but they had just learned that their assumptions could be completely wrong. The woman, however, did not notice their reactions. She sat quietly, closing her eyes for a moment and letting the applause and energy settle into a calm rhythm around her. She knew this was just the beginning, not the final measure of what she could do. The other contestants began to talk among themselves, their voices low but tinged with curiosity. A few whispered that she must have had years of secret practice, a life devoted to music that no one knew about. Some were angry at themselves for judging too quickly, while others were stubborn, still convinced that luck had played a role in her brief performance. The woman could hear the low murmur, but she did not respond, did not join in their conversations, and did not allow their thoughts to disturb her focus. She had learned long ago that true talent and preparation were not affected by the opinions of strangers. As she sat, she remembered the long journey that had brought her here. Music had always been a part of her life, but it had not been easy. She had started playing the piano as a child, encouraged by a family who loved music but had little time or money to support her fully. Her early years were filled with practice on an old, slightly out-of-tune instrument, learning by listening carefully, mimicking the pieces she loved, and memorizing them until she could play them without looking. She had been passionate, dedicated, and determined, but life had a way of pulling her in other directions. Responsibilities, work, and family had demanded her attention, and her music had been set aside, stored in quiet corners of her memory. Now, decades later, she had returned to the piano, not for fame or recognition, but to honor a part of herself she had neglected. The community audition was the perfect opportunity to reconnect with her music, to see if the skill, the feeling, and the heart she had carried all those years were still alive. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement, but also a steady calm that came from knowing she had worked hard and prepared carefully. This was not about proving anything to others. It was about reclaiming her own story. Around her, other contestants were still practicing silently, some plucking their instruments from cases, others running through scales in the air. One young woman near the front had a bright red folder and practiced aggressively, tapping her fingers on the music as though trying to force perfection. A few men were quietly whispering about technique, timing, and expression, comparing notes and judging each other. Their focus was intense, but it carried a sense of competitiveness that the woman had long since outgrown. She did not need to compete in the way they understood. She only needed to share the music in her own way. Some of the audience members began to shift their attention toward her again. A few were curious, some impressed, and others still skeptical. They had seen only a brief glimpse of what she could do, and curiosity made them wonder if the performance had been a fluke. They watched her quietly, their eyes following her as she made small adjustments to her folder and took deep breaths. She did not notice them individually, but felt the room as a whole, the atmosphere of expectation and tension. The judges, meanwhile, were scribbling notes, occasionally glancing toward her. There was a subtle acknowledgment among them that the performance had been unexpected, skillful, and expressive. They did not yet reveal their thoughts to the audience or the other contestants, but they exchanged quiet looks of professional curiosity. In their experience, a musician's story often lay in what they did not see at first glance, in the subtleties of timing, dynamics, and emotion. They sensed that this woman carried a depth that could not be measured in years of study alone. As she waited, she reflected on the way people had treated her in the past, the times she had been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. There had been moments of shame, moments of doubt, and moments when she had almost given up entirely on performing in public. But music had always called her back, a quiet, insistent voice that reminded her that talent and passion could survive neglect and still bloom again. She remembered the hours spent alone, practicing late at night when the world was asleep, letting the music flow through her as if it were a part of her very being. Those hours had been difficult, lonely, but they had built her foundation, and now she was returning to it, stronger and more certain than ever. The murmurs of other contestants grew louder. A few still whispered about her clothes, her age, her quiet demeanor. Some expressed disbelief at how she could play so well. Others, more quietly, began to question their assumptions, realizing that talent cannot always be judged by appearance. They shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to respect her silently or continue their earlier teasing. The woman ignored it all. Her mind was entirely on her next performance, the music she would share, and the joy of playing itself. When her name was called again for the next round, she stood slowly, adjusted her folder, and walked toward the piano with the same quiet confidence as before. The hall seemed to notice the difference this time. There was a subtle change in energy, a sense that something significant was about to happen. The contestants who had mocked her moments earlier looked on with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They were no longer laughing. They were trying to anticipate her next move, unsure of what she might do. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over her. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, then pressed down gently, releasing the first notes of her chosen piece. The melody began softly, delicate, and precise, carrying a warmth that filled the room. The audience leaned in, and even the judges seemed to pay closer attention. Every note, every pause, every gentle accent spoke of years of dedication, of emotion, and of a love for music that had never faded. The performance unfolded slowly, deliberately, yet with a natural flow that made it seem effortless. She did not play to impress. She played to express, to tell a story through sound. The music carried memories, hopes, and quiet strength. It was as if she were inviting the audience into her world, showing them not just skill, but resilience, patience, and authenticity. Each note resonated, each chord lingered, and the audience felt it, even if they could not articulate why it moved them so deeply. As the final notes faded, the hall was silent for a brief, suspended moment. Then, slowly, the applause began to rise, growing in intensity and warmth. Some of the contestants who had laughed and whispered before were stunned into silence, unable to deny the power and beauty of what they had just heard. Others clapped hesitantly at first, then more sincerely as the realization sank in that this woman, so plain and unassuming in appearance, had delivered something extraordinary. The judges nodded, their faces showing the faintest smiles of approval and admiration. They had seen many skilled performers, but this one carried something rare: depth, emotion, and a story told through music that could not be faked or rushed out after stepping down from the stage. She returned to her seat, her expression calm but satisfied. She did not need praise, yet she felt a quiet joy in knowing that the music had been heard, that it had touched the room, and that the assumptions of the audience and contestants alike had been challenged. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted. The whispers of mockery had been replaced with curiosity, admiration, and a sense of respect. People were starting to see her, not as the plain woman they had underestimated, but as a musician with talent, passion, and a story worth listening to. Even those who had initially judged her were beginning to recognize their own bias. They realized how easily appearances could mislead, how quickly one could dismiss someone without knowing their history, effort, or heart. It was a lesson that some would carry with them long after the audition ended. The woman, meanwhile, remained centered in her purpose, her joy not dependent on the approval of others, but on the act of sharing her music, on reconnecting with the part of herself that had always loved the piano dot as the day progressed. She continued to participate, each performance bringing new depth and attention. The contestants around her adjusted their expectations, some with admiration, some with quiet envy, but all recognizing that something remarkable was unfolding. The audience became more attentive, more engaged, and the judges grew increasingly impressed with her skill, her timing, and the emotional resonance of her playing. Every note she played seemed to tell a story. Every pause carried meaning, and the combination created a performance that was both captivating and unforgettable. Through it all, the woman remained humble, focused, and centered. She did not let the applause or attention change her, did not seek validation beyond the music itself. Her goal was clear: to play as she had always wanted, to honor her past, and to express the depth of feeling that only music could convey. And in doing so, she not only reclaimed a part of herself, but also subtly transformed the atmosphere of the room, turning doubt and judgment into curiosity, respect, and admiration. The room had settled into a quiet rhythm as the next phase of the audition approached. The air was a mix of anticipation, nervous energy, and the faint smell of polished wood from the grand piano. Contestants fidgeted with their music folders, tapping their fingers or shifting in their seats. The judges reviewed their notes, eyes occasionally lifting to watch the subtle movements of the performers. And in the corner of the hall, the woman sat quietly, her hands folded over her music folder, calm and collected. She seemed almost invisible at first, but there was a stillness about her that drew a faint curiosity from those who glanced her way. Around her, whispers continued, though now more subdued. The other contestants, especially the younger ones, exchanged glances, some nervously, some with lingering doubt. They could not quite shake the impression left by her previous performance. A few of the more confident performers began to worry quietly, realizing that talent could appear in unexpected forms. The woman did not notice their speculation. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the music she had memorized, feeling each note as though it had a life of its own. Waiting for her to release it, her thoughts drifted briefly to her earlier years, when she would spend hours alone at the piano in a small, dimly lit room. The worn keys beneath her fingers, the slight hum of the old instrument, the quiet that filled the space while the world outside continued with its noise. These memories were comforting. They reminded her of a time when music was her closest companion, her refuge, and her expression of self. The challenges of life had pushed her away from the piano at times, but the love for it had never left. Today, sitting in the midst of competition, those memories gave her strength, grounding her amidst the tension and the subtle judgments of the audience dot as the names were called. Contestants took their turns, each performance met with polite applause or murmurs of appreciation. Some were confident, their fingers moving swiftly across the keys, faces glowing with effort and pride. Others stumbled slightly, missing notes or faltering under the pressure, their expressions tightening with frustration or embarrassment. The judges noted each performance carefully, marking technical skills, expression, and presence. And all the while, the woman observed quietly, absorbing the atmosphere without judgment, feeling neither envy nor fear, only the steady pull of the music waiting for her. Finally, her name was called again, signaling her turn for the next piece. She rose slowly, adjusting her folder, and walked toward the piano with deliberate steps. The murmurs in the hall quieted as people recognized her again, still in disbelief over her prior performance. Some contestants tried to hide their anxiety, their confident expressions faltering as they realized that they had underestimated her skill. Others were still skeptical, unsure if what they had heard before could be repeated. The woman, however, felt none of these distractions. She focused entirely on the sound she would create, on the story she intended to share through the music. Sitting at the piano, she placed her hands on the keys gently, feeling the smooth black and white surfaces beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, inhaled slowly, and allowed herself to imagine the music unfolding as if it were already flowing through her. The first notes were soft and deliberate, each one connecting to the next with natural grace. The audience, initially quiet, leaned in slightly, sensing the difference in the way she played. Her touch was confident yet tender, precise yet full of emotion. It was a performance that seemed to belong to her entirely, as if she had been waiting decades to share this moment. The other contestants watched, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. They had judged her by her appearance and assumed she would be timid or unsure, but her performance told a different story. Every note was deliberate, controlled, and full of expression, revealing years of practice, patience, and dedication. Her presence at the piano commanded attention not through loud gestures or flashy movements, but through authenticity, precision, and a natural flow of the music dot. As the piece continued, her fingers moved swiftly yet gracefully, sometimes lingering on a chord to emphasize a subtle emotion, sometimes racing lightly to convey energy and excitement. The audience, caught between admiration and astonishment, listened in silence, allowing themselves to be drawn into the story she told without words. Even the judges, experienced musicians who had seen countless performances, could not hide the sense of intrigue and appreciation that grew with every measure. The woman's mind wandered briefly to the many obstacles she had faced in life. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether her love for music could survive the demands of work, family, and responsibility. Yet those moments had also strengthened her, teaching her resilience, patience, and the quiet power of dedication. Every note she played carried not just technical skill, but also the weight of experience, emotion, and a lifetime of learning. The audience felt it, even if they could not name it, sensing that this performance was more than practice. It was a part of the performer's soul. Around her, some contestants shifted uncomfortably. They had expected to see a timid, inexperienced woman, and they were instead witnessing something rare and profound. Some glanced at each other, whispering in disbelief, while others tried to maintain composure, focusing instead on their own upcoming performances. The woman remained completely unaware of their reactions, entirely immersed in the music. Her focus was internal, guided by the rhythm of her heart and the story she wished to convey through each keystroke. The piece built gradually, starting with soft, measured notes that flowed seamlessly into richer, more complex sections. The audience leaned forward instinctively, caught by the interplay of subtlety and power in the performance. She moved through the music as though it were a conversation, the piano responding to her touch with sensitivity and clarity. Each pause, each accent, and each variation in tempo was intentional, creating layers of emotion and meaning. The hall seemed to shrink around her, focusing entirely on the connection between performer, instrument, an audience as the climax of the piece approached. Her hands moved with a confidence and fluidity that made the music soar. The soft beginnings transformed into a cascade of notes, each carefully articulated, yet flowing naturally into the next. The audience felt the intensity, the care, and the emotion carried by the performance. It was not about impressing anyone with speed or difficulty, but about conveying depth, passion, and the beauty of the music itself. The judges exchanged subtle looks of appreciation, recognizing a rare blend of skill and heart that could not be replicated by mechanical practice alone. Finally, the last notes fell gently, leaving a lingering resonance in the hall. Silence followed for a brief, suspended moment, a shared breath between the performer and the audience. Then, applause began slowly, growing steadily as more people joined in. The sound was sincere, warm, and appreciative, not for spectacle, but for the beauty, dedication, and authenticity they had just witnessed. Even the contestants who had previously mocked her were caught off guard, their faces revealing shock, awe, and a reluctant respect. The woman rose from the piano with a calm grace, acknowledging the applause with a slight, serene smile. She returned to her seat without rushing, her composure unshaken, carrying a quiet pride that came not from recognition, but from sharing her music fully and honestly. Around her, the energy in the hall had shifted. The air that had been filled with judgment and anticipation was now infused with admiration and newfound respect. The audience, judges, and contestants alike had been reminded that true talent and dedication cannot be measured by appearances or assumptions. Back at her seat, she allowed herself a few moments of rest. Her fingers tingled slightly from the movement, but her heart felt light. She had faced the scrutiny of others, the pressure of the stage, and the lingering doubts in her own mind, and she had performed with authenticity and grace. Each measure she had played was a testament to her journey, her patience, and the quiet strength that had carried her through years of practice and perseverance. The applause had been rewarding, yet secondary to the fulfillment she felt from reconnecting with her music in the quiet moments between performances. She reflected on the way people judged too quickly, assuming that appearance and confidence alone determined ability. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, yet she had demonstrated that talent is often hidden, revealed only when given the opportunity and space to flourish. Her mind wandered briefly to her past struggles and sacrifices, the small victories and setbacks that had led her to this moment. Each note she had played was infused with the essence of those experiences, creating a performance that could not be replicated or faked. Around the hall, the atmosphere continued to evolve. Contestants adjusted their expectations, realizing that competition was not solely about showmanship or outward confidence. The audience, too, had shifted from casual observation to deep engagement, following her music with curiosity and appreciation. Even the judges, seasoned and discerning, found themselves drawn to the subtle mastery and emotion she conveyed, recognizing that the performance was a rare combination of skill, heart, and life experience. As the next contestant prepared to take the stage, she closed her eyes briefly, centering hers. As the next round began, the energy in the hall had changed completely. Where there had been whispers and laughter, there was now a focused silence. People leaned forward slightly, their eyes fixed on the woman as she prepared to play again. Her calm presence seemed to draw the attention of the audience and the contestants alike. Even the judges, experienced and professional, watched with an unexpected intensity. They had seen many talented performers, but there was something unique about the way she approached the piano. Every movement, every breath seemed deliberate yet effortless, and it carried an authenticity that was rare and compelling. The woman took a deep breath, placing her hands lightly on the keys. The hall was still, the anticipation almost tangible. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, letting the music flow in her mind before touching the first note. When her fingers pressed down, the sound was gentle, precise, and filled with emotion. Each note seemed to tell a story, unfolding naturally from one to the next. The audience listened with rapt attention, and even those who had previously mocked her found themselves drawn in by the depth and beauty of her performance. Around her, contestants shifted nervously, whispering quietly among themselves. They had assumed that her first performances were fortunate accidents, but as the music flowed seamlessly from her hands, it became clear that her talent was both real and consistent. Some glanced at each other with unease, realizing that they had underestimated her. Their confidence had been built on assumptions about appearance and demeanor, assumptions that were now completely challenged. The woman, however, remained entirely focused on her music. She did not glance at the audience or the judges. She was fully immersed in the notes, in the story she wanted to tell. The piece she played this time was more complex, demanding both technical skill and emotional expression. Her hands moved with agility, yet each chord and melody was carefully shaped. She leaned slightly forward, eyes closed, as though she were in conversation with the piano itself. The sound filled the hall, resonating in every corner and capturing the attention of everyone present. Each crescendo and delicate pause was timed perfectly, creating a sense of flow and narrative that went beyond mere technical ability. It was a performance that connected with the listener on a deeper level, revealing not just talent but heart, patience, and life experience. As she played, memories of her past journey with music drifted through her mind. She remembered the countless hours spent alone at the piano, practicing in dimly lit rooms, the worn keys familiar beneath her fingers. She remembered the sacrifices she had made to care for her family, the moments when her own dreams had been set aside, and the quiet determination that had kept her returning to the music she loved. These memories were not burdens, but sources of strength. Each note she played infused with the lessons and resilience gained through years of dedication. The music was a reflection of her life, a story told without words, yet felt profoundly by those who listened. The audience remained silent, absorbed by the performance. The judges leaned forward, their pens pausing over score sheets, recognizing the depth and precision in each movement. Even the young contestants who had once whispered and mocked her were now quiet, their expressions a mixture of surprise, admiration, and respect. They realized that the woman before them was not only skilled, but also composed, confident in a way that came from experience rather than showmanship. Her presence commanded attention not through flamboyance, but through authenticity, through the purity and intention behind each note. The piece built slowly, beginning with soft, tender melodies and gradually increasing in intensity. Her hands moved with grace and control, transitioning smoothly between intricate passages and bold, expressive chords. The audience was drawn into the ebb and flow of the music, feeling the tension and release, the light and dark, the highs and lows that she wove seamlessly together. Each phrase was delivered with clarity, yet carried the nuance of years of understanding, practice, and emotional investment. It was not merely a technical display, but a conversation, a sharing of experience and feeling that transcended words. The woman's mind occasionally wandered, reflecting on the moments of doubt and struggle that had punctuated her life. She remembered the times when she had questioned her abilities, the moments when the world's expectations had seemed overwhelming, and the quiet persistence that had kept her returning to the piano. Those experiences had shaped her, teaching resilience, patience, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Every note she played carried that history, a subtle but powerful narrative that resonated deeply with the listeners. The audience could feel it, even if they could not articulate why they were so moved. Around her, the energy in the room was palpable. Contestants who had once been confident were now tense, realizing that the woman's skill was undeniable. They shifted in their seats, some glancing nervously at the judges, others stealing quick, uncertain looks at her. The previous mocking gestures and whispers had vanished, replaced by silent acknowledgement of her talent. The audience, too, was engaged in a way they had not been before, following every movement of her hands, every rise and fall in the music, captivated by the authenticity and depth of her performance. The climax of the piece arrived, a section that demanded both technical precision and emotional intensity. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating a cascade of sound that was both powerful and controlled. The notes resonated through the hall, filling every space with richness and clarity. She leaned into the music, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, fully immersed in the expression of each phrase. The audience felt the energy, the care, and the emotion carried in each passage, and they responded with quiet awe, recognizing the mastery and dedication evident in her playing dot as the piece drew to a close. Her hands moved to the final chords, pressing each note with deliberate care. The last sounds lingered in the air, soft and fading, leaving a sense of completion and satisfaction. Silence followed for a few moments, a collective breath held in reverence for the performance they had just witnessed. Then, gradually, applause began to fill the hall, starting softly and growing steadily into a warm, enthusiastic response. The sound was sincere, not for show, but for the beauty, skill, and authenticity that had been displayed. Even the contestants who had previously mocked her could not suppress their astonishment, their faces revealing a mixture of respect, disbelief, and newfound admiration. The woman rose slowly, her expression serene, acknowledging the applause with a gentle nod. She returned to her seat, calm and composed, her heart light with quiet satisfaction. She had shared her music fully, expressing the emotions and experiences that had shaped her, and in doing so, she had touched the audience in a way that was meaningful and lasting. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted completely. Where there had been judgment and skepticism, there was now respect and appreciation, a recognition of the depth and skill that could not be measured by appearance alone. Back at her seat, she allowed herself a moment to rest, her hands tingling slightly from the effort, her mind still connected to the music she had played. She reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, the years of practice, the quiet dedication, and the persistence that had never wavered despite challenges. She felt gratitude for the opportunity to perform, to share her story through music, and to reclaim a part of herself that had always been deeply important. The applause and acknowledgement of the audience were gratifying, but the true reward lay in the act of expressing herself and being heard. The contestants around her were adjusting to a new reality. They had expected an easy assumption, a performer they could underestimate, but the woman had repeatedly demonstrated skill, grace, and depth. Some were inspired, some were humbled, and some were left questioning their own assumptions and behavior. The room itself seemed transformed, no longer a place of judgment or competition alone, but a space where talent, dedication, and authenticity were recognized and valued. The judges, experienced and discerning, continued to note the exceptional quality of her performance, recognizing that it was not just about technical skill, but also about emotional resonance and connection with the audience. As the next round approached, she remained centered, preparing herself mentally and emotionally. Her focus was clear, her intention steady, and her connection to the music unbroken. She understood that each performance was an opportunity, not just to display skill, but to tell a story, to share a part of herself, and to remind everyone present of the power of music to communicate beyond words. The hall, now attentive and respectful, seemed to recognize the significance of her presence and performance. Waiting with quiet anticipation for the next chapter she would unfold, even the young contestants who had mocked her earlier now observed her with a different perspective. They noticed the calmness in her demeanor, the confidence in her movements, and the authenticity in her playing. Their previous assumptions were challenged, their confidence tempered, and their understanding of talent and dedication expanded. The audience, too, was learning, witnessing firsthand that true skill and artistry often appear in unexpected forms, and that judgment based on appearances can be misleading. With each passing moment, the hall had become alive with an unusual energy. The previous performances had already set a high bar, but the woman's calm, deliberate presence seemed to have shifted everything. Contestants moved quietly, some exchanging nervous glances, others focusing intently on their own music, aware that their next performances would be measured against hers. The audience, too, seemed to lean forward, waiting to see what would unfold next. There was a sense of respect now, a quiet acknowledgement that they were about to witness something remarkable. The woman opened her music folder once again, carefully selecting the piece she would play next. She handled each sheet with gentle precision, turning them slowly and allowing herself a moment to connect with the notes before beginning. Her movements were deliberate, measured, and confident. She did not rush, nor did she seek to impress anyone with showy gestures. Every action was intentional, reflecting a sense of calm mastery that came from years of practice and quiet dedication. Her focus was entirely on the music and the story it carried. The contestants who had previously whispered and laughed were now silent, their expressions a mix of apprehension and curiosity. They had underestimated her before, but now there was no denying the skill and depth she possessed. Even the judges leaned slightly forward, their pens momentarily still, watching her with the same attention they would give to a seasoned professional. They had seen countless performances in their years, but there was something about her playing that was different. It was not just technical proficiency. It was heart, emotion, and the lived experience that came through in every note dot as she sat at the piano. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music flow through her mind before her fingers touched the keys. The hall became quiet, almost reverently so, as if the audience collectively held its breath. The first notes were gentle, precise, and full of warmth. Each sound was carefully articulated, every chord resonant, conveying emotion and intention. The music unfolded like a story, rising and falling naturally, filled with both strength and subtlety. The audience was drawn in, unable to look away, fully immersed in the world she was creating. Her fingers moved with fluidity and confidence, transitioning seamlessly between passages that required technical skill and moments that demanded emotional depth. She leaned into the music, closing her eyes more fully, allowing herself to be guided entirely by the notes and the emotions behind them. Each phrase carried meaning, a reflection of her journey, her patience, and the countless hours of dedication that had shaped her as a musician. The audience felt the authenticity of her performance, sensing that each note was born from experience, emotion, and a profound connection to her craft. As the piece progressed, the music grew in complexity, demanding both agility and control. Her fingers danced across the keys with effortless precision, yet each movement was purposeful, conveying expression, nuance, and a sense of narrative. The audience remained captivated, leaning forward slightly, following the ebb and flow of the performance with rapt attention. Even the contestants who had mocked her earlier were now tense, watching with wide eyes, realizing that they had misjudged her completely. Their whispers and snickers had vanished, replaced by quiet awe and respect. The judges, seasoned and discerning, continued to take notes, occasionally exchanging subtle glances. They recognized the mastery in her hands, the emotion in her interpretation, and the overall presence she carried. This was not a performance that could be measured solely by technique. It was an experience, a story told through sound that resonated deeply with all who were present. They noted the balance between control and expression, the way she navigated the dynamics of the piece, and the connection she maintained with the audience through every measure. The woman's thoughts wandered briefly. reflecting on the years of practice and perseverance that had brought her here. She remembered the quiet nights alone at the piano, the worn keys that had been her companions, the times when she had doubted her abilities, and the persistence that had kept her returning to the music. These memories were not burdens, but sources of strength, informing her playing and giving depth to each note. Every phrase carried a sense of history, emotion, and authenticity that the audience could feel even if they could not articulate it. It was a connection beyond words, a shared understanding of dedication, patience, and passion. The music built to a crescendo, with the woman's fingers moving rapidly yet gracefully, each note resonant and deliberate. The hall seemed to vibrate with the sound, every listener absorbed in the performance. Her posture, calm yet engaged, reflected complete immersion in the piece. There was no tension, no unnecessary gestures, only pure expression through sound. The audience responded instinctively, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes to focus fully on the music. The energy in the room was electric, a collective recognition of the beauty and skill being displayed. As the climax passed, the piece transitioned into softer, more contemplative passages. Her fingers glided across the keys, delicate yet precise, creating a sense of intimacy and reflection. The audience could feel the subtle emotions conveyed, the moments of vulnerability and tenderness that were carefully woven into the performance. Even those who were critics, accustomed to analyzing every technical aspect, found themselves moved by the emotional depth she expressed. The music spoke directly to their hearts, bypassing judgment and assumptions entirely. Throughout the performance, the woman remained fully present, connected to the piano and the story she was telling. She was not aware of the individual reactions of the audience or the judges. Her focus was entirely on the music and the experience of expressing it. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation in dynamics was intentional, shaped by years of practice and the inner life she had cultivated through dedication and love for her craft. The performance was a culmination of her journey, a testament to the power of perseverance, patience, and authenticity. As the final notes approached, she allowed the sound to linger, letting each chord resonate fully before moving to the next. The hall was silent, the audience collectively holding its breath in anticipation of the conclusion. Her hands moved with careful precision, ending the piece with a soft, deliberate flourish that left the final note hanging in the air. For a moment, there was complete stillness, a pause that felt almost sacred, as if everyone present understood the significance of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, tentative at first, and then steadily growing into a warm, enthusiastic response. The audience clapped with sincerity, their hands expressing admiration, respect, and gratitude for the experience they had just shared. Even the contestants who had mocked her earlier were caught off guard, some clapping quietly, others remaining momentarily speechless, unable to deny the impact of her performance. The judges nodded, their expressions showing approval and acknowledgement of the rare combination of technical mastery and emotional depth they had. Witness. The woman rose from the piano with a calm, serene grace, acknowledging the applause with a gentle smile. She returned to her seat quietly, unhurried, her composure intact. There was a quiet pride in her expression, not from seeking validation, but from the knowledge that she had performed with authenticity and heart. She had shared her music fully, expressing the emotions and experiences that had shaped her journey. The atmosphere in the hall had transformed completely. Where there had once been judgment, skepticism, and whispers, there was now respect, admiration, and a deeper understanding of her talent. As she sat back down, she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. Her fingers tingled slightly from the exertion, but her heart was light, filled with the satisfaction of having given her all. She thought of the years of practice, the quiet moments alone with her music, the times she had persevered despite challenges, and the unwavering dedication that had brought her to this point. The applause and recognition were gratifying, but the true reward lay in the act of expressing herself fully, sharing her music with honesty, and connecting with the audience on a level that transcended words. Around her, the contestants and audience members were adjusting to this new reality. The young performers who had once whispered and mocked now watched with humility and curiosity, realizing that talent and dedication often appear in unexpected forms. The audience, too, had been transformed, recognizing that skill, heart, and authenticity cannot be judged by appearances alone. The judges continued their notes, acknowledging the exceptional quality of the performance and the emotional resonance that had captivated the entire hall. As the next round prepared to begin, the woman remained centered, her focus steady, and her connection to the music intact. She understood that each performance was an opportunity, not just to demonstrate skill, but to share a story, to communicate emotion, and to honor the dedication and persistence that had defined her journey. The hall, attentive and respectful, awaited her next movement with anticipation, fully aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a testament to the quiet power of perseverance, talent, and the beauty of authentic expression. The final round of the audition had arrived, and the atmosphere in the hall was charged with anticipation. Contestants were preparing their pieces, some pacing nervously, others practicing subtle motions with their fingers, feeling the rhythm in their minds. The audience was silent, waiting to see who would rise to the occasion and who would falter under the pressure. The woman sat quietly in the corner, her music folder in her lap, her fingers resting lightly upon it. She appeared calm, unhurried, and composed, a stark contrast to the restless energy surrounding her. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Music had been a constant companion, but life had often demanded that she set aside her dreams to meet the needs of others. The hours she had spent practicing alone had been her secret refuge, a place where her soul could speak freely through the piano. Today, this stage was not about proving herself to anyone, but about sharing a lifetime of dedication, resilience, and passion. She knew that the music she played carried her story, and she would let it speak fully without concern for judgment or recognition. Around her, contestants glanced at one another, some nervously, others with quiet determination. The performances she had already delivered had set a high standard. Those who had once mocked her were now quiet, unsure of what to expect, realizing that assumptions based on appearances were easily misleading. Even the judges, seasoned musicians with years of experience, had been drawn in by her combination of technical skill, emotional depth, and authenticity. They watched carefully, aware that this final performance might reveal even more about her talent. When her name was called, the room seemed to pause. She stood slowly, adjusting her music folder and walking toward the piano with deliberate steps. Her calm presence was magnetic, and a hush fell over the audience. The young contestants who had whispered and laughed before now sat silently, their expressions a mix of curiosity, admiration, and uncertainty. Even the judges leaned slightly forward, pens in hand, ready to capture every nuance of what was about to unfold. Sitting at the piano, she allowed herself a moment to feel the instrument beneath her hands. The polished keys reflected the soft light of the hall, their familiar smoothness grounding her. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled deeply, and let the music flow through her mind before touching a single note. When her fingers pressed down, the sound was immediately rich and expressive, drawing the audience into her world. Each note carried weight, clarity, and intention, a blend of technical mastery and heartfelt expression that made the performance feel alive and intimate. Her fingers moved with precision, each chord and melody carefully shaped. The audience could feel the story unfolding in the music, the rise and fall, the tension and release, all carefully crafted yet appearing effortless. The young contestants, who had once believed they could easily outshine her, now watched in awe, realizing that talent was not something to be judged by outward appearances alone. Her performance commanded attention, not through flamboyance, but through authenticity, focus, and a deep understanding of the music. The piece she played was challenging, demanding technical skill, emotional nuance, and a sense of timing that only experience could bring. Her hands moved fluidly across the keys, each note connecting seamlessly to the next. She leaned slightly forward, swaying with the rhythm, fully absorbed in the story she was telling through the piano. The audience was captivated, some closing their eyes to better experience the music, others sitting rigid with anticipation, and all of them moved by the emotion and mastery she conveyed. Her mind briefly wandered to the years of practice that had prepared her for this moment. The quiet nights alone, the worn keys beneath her fingers, the perseverance through self-doubt, and the joy found in small improvements, all of these memories infused her performance with depth. Every chord and passage was a reflection of her journey, a testament to resilience, patience, and love for the music. The audience could feel this connection, sensing the authenticity in every sound, even if they could not explain it in words. As the piece continued, the music built gradually, each phrase increasing in intensity, each passage conveying a different emotion. There were moments of softness and reflection, where delicate notes lingered in the air, and moments of strength and vitality, where rapid passages showcased her skill and control. The audience leaned forward instinctively, unable to look away, completely absorbed in the narrative unfolding before them. Even the judges, who had witnessed countless performances, seemed genuinely moved, recognizing the rare combination of technical proficiency and heartfelt expression. Around her, the young contestants were tense. They had underestimated her initially, and now they were witnessing a level of artistry they had not anticipated. Their whispered confidence was gone, replaced by silent observation and an awareness of their own limitations. The woman's calm demeanor and focused presence contrasted sharply with their nervous energy, highlighting the power of experience and quiet confidence. The music reached its climax, a section that required both precision and emotional intensity. Her fingers danced across the keys, delivering the notes with clarity, expression, and control. The audience felt the energy and passion, responding instinctively to the ebb and flow of the performance. Her posture, calm yet engaged, conveyed both command of the music and a deep connection to the emotional content. The hall seemed to vibrate with the resonance of each chord, the subtle shifts in dynamics, and the careful shaping of every phrase. As the climax passed, the music transitioned into softer, more introspective passages. Her fingers moved gently, carefully, as though each note carried a story of its own. The audience could sense the vulnerability, the tenderness, and the depth of feeling embedded in the performance. Even those who were highly analytical, accustomed to dissecting performances for technical merit, were moved by the emotional richness and authenticity she conveyed. The music spoke directly to the heart, creating a connection that went beyond critique or evaluation. Throughout the performance, the woman remained fully present, entirely focused on the piano and the story she was telling. She did not seek validation or recognition. Her goal was to share the music fully, to convey the emotions and experiences that had shaped her. Every movement, every subtle variation in timing and dynamics, was intentional, a reflection of years of practice and a deep understanding of the instrument. The performance was a culmination of her journey, a living testament to the dedication, patience, and love for music that had sustained her. The final notes approached, soft and deliberate, each chord resonating with clarity. She allowed the sound to linger, giving the audience time to absorb the completion of the story. The hall was silent for a few moments, a collective pause honoring the beauty and skill they had witnessed. Then, gradually, applause erupted, growing steadily into a warm and enthusiastic response. The audience clapped sincerely, moved by the performance and the authenticity behind it. Even the contestants who had once mocked her were silent, unable to deny the impact of her music, their expressions revealing a mixture of astonishment, respect, and admiration. The judges nodded, their faces showing recognition and approval. They had witnessed countless performances, but this one was exceptional, not merely for technical skill, but for the emotional resonance and storytelling it contained. The woman rose slowly, acknowledging the applause with a gentle, serene smile. She returned to her seat calmly, her satisfaction quiet but profound. She had performed fully, expressing herself through music, and in doing so, had transformed the perceptions of everyone in the room. Back at her seat, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Her hands tingled slightly from the exertion, but her heart was light with fulfillment. She thought of the years spent practicing alone, the challenges overcome, and the dedication that had guided her journey. The applause and recognition were welcome, but the true reward lay in the act of sharing her music authentically, conveying a story that only she could tell. The hall, once filled with whispers and judgment, now resonated with respect, admiration, and understanding that, as the final results were announced, the woman remained composed, knowing that her performance had spoken for itself. She had faced scrutiny, doubt, and judgment, yet she had shared her music with authenticity and courage. The audience, contestants, and judges alike, had been reminded that talent is not always visible at first glance, that patience, dedication, and emotional depth are often the true measures of skill. The hall was filled with a renewed sense of appreciation for artistry and the power of music to connect hearts. The young contestants, who had once mocked her, approached quietly afterward, some offering tentative words of respect and congratulations. The woman accepted their gestures with grace, her demeanor gentle and kind. She did not dwell on past judgments or mockery. She understood that true talent speaks for itself, and that respect is earned through action, not appearances. The audience members approached in smaller groups, expressing their admiration, sharing how moved they had been by her performance. She listened politely, smiling, grateful for the acknowledgement, but not dependent on it. The judges offered their final comments, praising her technical skill, emotional depth, and the authenticity of her performance. They noted the